Welcome, everyone, to Friends Talking Nerdy. This is Tim the Nerd, and joining me is the Reverend Tracy. And this week we are going to begin Education Month on Friends Talking Nerdy. And the episode thesis that we're going to have for this week: a healthy education system doesn't simply produce educated individuals, it shapes healthier communities. And just like we've been doing with Freedom Month, with Motherhood and Fatherhood Month, we wanted to take kind of a broader look at this particular topic, but do it also via the lens of mental health.
Right, because better education is associated with better health literacy, financial literacy, civic engagement, and even longer life expectancy. So, public health researchers often describe education as a social determinant of health, right? So, it's more important than simply just what you're teaching a child. So I almost wonder, and I'm excited about this episode because it's the question I like to ask, is if we should stop thinking of education as a children's issue and start thinking of it as a community infrastructure issue, because we all benefit when the people around us are healthier thinkers and more educated, because these are the effects it has on the community, not just the single person, but the communities involved. And that's why we want to bring it to the attention of, hey, non-parents and people who are never babies, like just never want to have kids, that's okay. This topic actually is for you too.
That's right, because today's question is one that I think a lot of people have probably asked, whether out loud or just in their heads. Why should someone care about education if they do not have children? Now, if your kids graduated years ago or you never had children, why should you care whether schools are doing well? On the surface, it sounds like everybody else's problem. But I think that this is one of those topics that quietly affects every one of us. Education doesn't just shape students, it shapes the people we work with, the people who vote, the people who become doctors, mechanics, artists, scientists, business owners, and neighbors. In other words, education isn't just about classrooms, it's about communities.
Exactly. Because, education is associated with many positive outcomes. We've talked about it before when we referenced the Opportunities Atlas. Like, that is the reason the education is brought up, is because it does actually factor to the greater community. And even the WHO and the CDC recognize that education, like, it is a social determinant of health influencing employment, income, health behaviors, and life expectancy, like I mentioned before, right? So obviously it's got an impact, because even if you wanted to say, oh, well, it only influences the person that's educated, well, then if you have an entire community of educated people that have better incomes, health outcomes, behaviors, and life expectancy, like, that's going to have that bigger influence, right? So it does build your communities, and it has that secondary and even potentially tertiary effect to those that are not as well educated just by being in a more educated community.
Which is why today we're asking why education matters to everyone and why psychology suggests that learning isn't something we're supposed to stop doing when we leave school. Now, when you hear somebody say, I don't have kids, so I don't really care about education, what's your first reaction?
Then you don't care about your community. Then I don't want to hear you talk about the dumb receptionist or the stupid clerk. I don't want to hear it anymore. Like, that's funny. Like that really is, like, when people say that education, like, oh, I don't want my tax dollars going towards public schools and I don't blah blah blah. Like, I hate to say that I feel like those are the same people that complain the most about, like, the people they interact with in their communities. And I'm like, well, if you really feel like everybody around you is dumb, then you should care about your tax dollars going to schools, right? Because I don't know. Most people do seem to kind of get that an educated population is better for your community. So it kind of seems like those are like the few that like rage against having to pay anything towards our education system. And I just can't help but feel that typically it's also that same person that just has this lower opinion of like the people in their communities sometimes. And I'm like, but you realize you depend on them. So yeah, if you want the cashier to be, better at handling things and more troubleshooting and not needing the computer to tell them everything, then maybe you should have a different attitude whenever you go to vote. 'Cause it's funny, we actually got ballots like this week in Washington. But whenever you go to vote for stuff and that educational stuff comes up, you need to care a little bit more because that does influence your experience with people in your community.
100% agreed. I do think that the number, though, is a little bit louder, but I also think we can kind of tie in something we've talked about in previous episodes, the pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. It's like people understand in theory the basic concept that a good, healthy, educated community is going to benefit everybody, but it's like they don't necessarily want to pay for that, and they think that people should be responsible on their own for that, which again baffles me because there are plenty of other countries that are not like third world or anything like that put a lot more into their education system than we do, and the results speak volumes.
Right. And I think it's also kind of been complicated though too, right? Because we've talked about like coming off of economic freedom and our some of our cultural mentalities around money, right? And that has a play too, because I think unfortunately it's not always that people don't want to pay into education. I think it's more that they have been wired of, well, they're using it wrong, therefore they should not have the money. And that way you get to keep more of your money so that you can put it where you want it. But the problem is, that means that people aren't giving it to the schools necessarily and to these community benefit type things. And that's just why that is, I guess, right? Because it goes back to, unfortunately, America, if there's people against something, odds are it's been politicized. And this has very much been a topic that has been politicized. And some of it is, well, but if you had your money, well, then you can educate your kids better. But that doesn't help the overall community when we look at it that way, is the problem with that thought.
Yeah, and I think we could definitely, like go down in the weeds and talk about stuff like school vouchers or charter schools or something like that, which I think is just a little bit beyond what we're going to be talking about today. So I don't think we should necessarily go down that route, but
Right.
but it is a factor because there is money going in different areas that isn't necessarily focusing on the larger scale of education. And which is not to say that there aren't like good private schools out there certainly are. It's not to say that there aren't good charter schools out there certainly are. But if the money that used to be delivered to public schools is now being divvied up, and everybody has far less of it except people that can pay a little bit more, that's a problem.
Right. And that's not really uh, like, I don't want my community's like wellness, my local cultural wellness to hinge on what money they have to fill holes in their lives, right? Like, I kind of support my taxes going and doing these things. So I guess I wanted to get that out there, that if you're feeling any cognitive dissonance, that teeth sucking thing we've talked about, that being almost a symptom of feeling cognitive dissonance, is the teeth suck, that or the teeth suck. If you feel that, understand you might have some narratives around education and talking about education and how we should view education that might be a little influenced by something. So if we can, try to put it to the side, hear us out for this one. But otherwise, it's not going to focus specifically on kids in school. We're going to cover a broad topic of what education means for our culture and community, because there's lots of educational stuff out there that gets paid, even if you look at it as a tax dollar thing. There is community education as well. So it's a big umbrella topic that I feel like has almost gotten this stressor under it because people get concerned about where money goes. And I go back to, I think this is a topic that has a little hinge of politicization to it. I'm not going to try to say that word again.
Politicization, or I even said it wrong. There we go. But
Political polarization, I guess. Like, it's just one of those things that this is another, education is one of those things that comes up a lot. So probably have a lot of opportunity to pepper in like some of that narrative this month too.
indeed, indeed. Now, I can actually understand why some of the people feel this way. Like, if something doesn't directly affect us, it's easy to think it's someone else's responsibility. But, as I think we're going to be pointing out here, psychology paints a much bigger picture than that. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions I think we carry is that education ends with graduation. You finish high school, college, trade school, whatever your path was, and that's it. Now you're educated. But psychology tells a very different story. Learning isn't an event, it's a lifelong process. Now, do you think we've accidentally confused schooling with education?
Yes, hands down. And this goes into some of the most promising, like psychology, even neurology, I dare say, on a term called neuroplasticity, right? Because it does not stop. And I think one of the problems is, and this even goes to some of the identity stuff. This comes back to like trying to be always curious, right? Is when you think you're done learning, I think it does something almost on an identity level where you almost feel that offense when somebody suggests that you need to learn more. And I think a lot of it is because we have a narrative that you are done learning at some point. Look at some of our adages. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, but neuroplasticity says, no, my friend. No, fam, you can indeed teach old dogs new tricks, especially human dogs. We are very good at learning new tricks, but a lot of it is you do have to have that open-minded mentality, right? Like you have to have the curiosity mentality, not the I'm done mentality. And I think this ties in really well because recently we talked about intellectual humility, and you have to have like an element of that to continue learning. Otherwise, you're going to think it's done, take it out of the oven, move on.
It's just that also in this country, though, we do face, when you become an adult, the reality that education does cost money. It's money coming out of your pocket. Now, if you go via the community college route and stick with Pell Grants, and have a little bit of money on your own, you can get away with furthering your education without necessarily hurting the bank book or anything like that. But it seems like it's geared towards once that 4 years or maybe 6 years, depending on if you go to graduate school, something like that. Once that those are done, then you're out in the workforce and you're trying to repay those student loans that you took out to go to college in the first place, and you don't have the luxury to go back. And then whoops, your entire industry is put into upheaval thanks to something like AI or robots or this or that, and then you find yourself having to find a brand new career at 50.
That is something that can happen. I do think it's fun little side note on the AI thing, by the way. I actually saw an article recently that said it's increasing certain jobs right now because it's not really that great and it still needs like the human element of like final proof. Anyway, that's even like a little bit of what I do for my job. But just an interesting thing. There's an article. I will maybe try to find it and share it this week on the FTN Facebook page because I did think it was an interesting read because that's something that myself and the Bishop Chris have talked about quite a bit. But yeah, so going back into like a little bit, just my last little nudge towards neuroplasticity and community college and some of that point is there's a reason people go back. Right? We have like people who go back to school much later in life to learn either skills or just learn because they're curious, right? The show Community kind of made fun of that with, oh gosh, what was his name? Chevy Chase was in it. I know that he's recently, I think, come under a lot of fire for some stuff, and I think he actually left that show possibly due to that. But that was his character, was the senior character that went back. Because I love neuroplasticity. It's helpful because it shows meaningful change remains possible throughout life. It's one of the most, in my opinion, hopeful discoveries in neuroscience because it tells that our brains are still capable of not just learning, but of change long after we've become adults. So, little asterisk note to take us back to our fatherhood and motherhood months of your parents, even as old as they are getting, can still change if they can be brought to kind of that open curiosity mindset, right? That you have to be humble to learn and to change. And we're not always good at humbling ourselves in certain like topics, etc. But I think that's all I've got on that. Sorry. I just realized, like, wait, I wanted to say this one thing about neuroplasticity, and I just didn't want to forget.
Yeah, and I see that look in your face, and I know not to stop you. But it's
Well,
like,
there is an interesting book that I learned about. It's called The Brain That Changes Itself. But I learned about it during the research on this. But I'm really curious about it because I am a big hopeful nut when it comes to people can change. That's like probably one of my things. That's like my toxic positivity trait is believing that people can change.
well, kind of piggybacking off what you've been saying, though, psychologists do talk about something called lifelong learning. It's the idea that continuing to learn throughout adulthood benefits not just our knowledge, but our mental health, our adaptability, and even our sense of purpose. People who remain intellectually engaged often report greater life satisfaction and are better equipped to adapt when life changes. That doesn't mean you have to earn three more degrees. Sometimes lifelong learning simply means remaining curious, reading books, trying new hobbies, learning another language, having conversations with people who think differently than you. Curiosity may be one of the healthiest habits we can develop. Now, what's something you've learned as an adult that completely changed how you saw the world?
Man, I'm not sure it ever ends for me because that's something that I'm glad I kind of got out of my life experience. It just made me ask a lot of why. A lot of why are people the way they are? And that is why the Reverend is the way Z is that I just got really curious, right? And so it made me a more curious person. But basically, pretty much everything I've learned with psychology, neurology, like it's constantly changing how I view the world because our world is full of people. And my drive and my inspiration is to understand people better. Like that's just what I got out of like, why did the people of my childhood do the things they did? And then it just kind of converted into why do people do the things they do? And I think like harnessing into that curiosity just keeps my view of the world like ever evolving, but in a good way. Like I feel like I understand more every time I open my mind and learn about a new concept, or every time like I kind of take that step back and even like evaluating people in that sense of having that practice of looking for both red flags and green flags, because I think that's something we forget to do too. But yeah, like those are the things that you can implement in your life that almost gives you a forever changing like perspective on the world.
Yeah, I mean, because it kind of allows you to kind of, in some ways, depending on what we're talking about, put yourself in other people's shoes as well. I mean, think about all of the like studies you can do about different communities out there in college. You know, you wanted to learn about Black studies. You know, they got plenty of classes that you can take on that, or books you can read, or stuff like that, and it gives you an idea of what it's like to be in another person's shoes and having to deal with that. Women's studies, LGBTQ studies.
Here's a one that might people biblical studies, because my sorry not sorry is it is kind of prevalent in our culture, and I found a lot more understanding actually being educated, not told from behind a pulpit cherry picked verses and what that person thinks it means. But like going and taking actual religious courses can be super fascinating because you'll find that a lot of that is not actually in those books. A lot of the modern interpretations are completely removed from the historical context. And so, like, even learning stuff like that can be super fascinating and almost empower you more when you are being caught with those conversations, right? Because hey, what better than to somebody whips out a verse to tell you you're a piece of shit to go, well, what's funny about that verse that was written by Peter and it was to the Episcopalian, you know what I mean? Like you can actually like be educated on it too. That is a total tack because it is a historical book. It's an ancient text. It doesn't hurt to say like we can learn about it instead of where I feel a lot of the mentality is throw it out and don't talk about it. And then you don't actually have a conversation, right? And I do understand people thinking that, but it's not technically fiction. So I don't think it should be treated as easily discarded as fiction. That's my opinion on ancient texts, any of them, really. Like, do you want to understand the Christians better because that's steeped in our culture here in America land? Highly recommend starting there. Starting to learn about other ones just to kind of bigot proof yourself is also, I highly recommend.
Yeah, because I mean, one thing you will find out is that, when it comes to stuff like translations, there will be times to where there will not necessarily be a clean translation from, like, let's say, the Greek to English, and kind of understanding the original intent of the original words used can also give you a better idea of what's actually being said instead of the, broadsword that's being used by some people in our culture today.
Exactly, because if you want an easy grab, guys, a lot of the books written by a Mr. Peter were actually to specific churches regarding specific issues in those churches. They were never meant to be blanket commands. For example, the whole bit about women not teaching, I know that's one that gets flung around because a lot of people don't like the Bible because it's repressive to women, but there were actually a lot of very well-renowned women teachers in the Bible, and one actually worked alongside Peter. So just fascinating example of a lot of those things used are cherry picked, and they're not. It goes back to if you know the context that the book was written in, it helps kind of break up the language barrier, like you said, because at best, a lot of those things are a translation of a translation. And this goes back to being curious instead of, well, that book is garbage.
Or that book is 100% true without putting any sort of critical thinking towards it.
Right. Educating yourself helps so much on both sides of your belief track. No matter where you're at with that one, highly recommend. It's really kind of interesting stuff, just my opinion though. But I'm a nerd.
Yes, as am I. As am I. Now, it's funny, when we're kids, adults constantly encourage us to ask questions. Then somewhere along the way, asking questions starts making people feel like they don't know enough, almost like curiosity becomes embarrassing. I think that's backwards. And that actually leads into something I think is one of the most helpful discoveries in psychology. Our brains never really stop changing. And this goes back to what you were saying earlier, neuroplasticity. Years, years ago, scientists believed that once we reached adulthood, our brains were basically finished developing. You were who you were. End of story. Well, guess what? We know that's not true. Our brains remain capable of forming new connections throughout our lives. Psychologists call it neuroplasticity. Now, that doesn't mean learning gets easier as we age. Sometimes it actually does require more effort, but the ability to learn remains. That's incredibly hopeful. Now, when you first learned that adults can literally continue changing their brains, did that surprise you?
Yes. I go back to I was raised in conservative Bible Belt, Texas, right? So there is very much, you know what you know, this thing is fact. And a lot of those old adages, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, a lot of that feels very ingrained in that culture. So of course, it surprised me. Granted, it's funny as it surprised me kind of early because I went to college. I went to a Christian university. I did end up, meeting a lot of people from a lot of places, which was great because that gave me that sophistication to help break a little bit of the racist stuff that I discovered I believed as I met new people, and said things and didn't realize that they were slurs because of where I was raised. Whoopsie doodle. But
I'll bet
yeah,
that was fun.
oh my gosh, I still think I could find the email from the person just going off on me about it. And I won't tell the story here because today's not that day, but I do remember the whole I got educated socially because I said the word and the hush that went over the group and I went, oh no. Oh no, I hear it now. Oh, I hear that's bad. I am sorry. And I was mortified. But yeah, the more people that you meet and the more that you get out there and just try to learn stuff, I think it kind of is just really eye opening, right? And even little things like getting rid of the dumb dumb games on your phone and putting education games on there, like Duolingo that teaches you a language or something like that. I think it can show you that you can, in fact, learn. You can actually pick up a hobby and learn something new all the time. So it was kind of interesting to kind of go into college and learn more about the brain because I did end up quickly going into psychology, not neurology, but psychology at least was that bridge for me for understanding okay, we can continue to learn. Because look, I had senior people in my college. And that was a big oh, what are you doing here? Because, it wasn't normalized. When I didn't know there were non-trad students. I had no idea that that was a thing. And that the, older people coming back just for education, especially when I eventually went to community college, because I moved to Arizona, quit the big university, took kind of a step back, went back to a community college for a bit. And yeah, it was really kind of cool to be see, because it kind of went against something that I was taught as a kid, that you're done and then you're done. And then I meet these people that are like, nope, I am curious. I am always learning. I'm like, and there is a very distinct difference in how that person acts, in day to day interactions, than the ones that I remembered from back home that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I am the way that I am. And I'm like, that feels more pleasant. I think I want to shoot for that. And that's really what opened me up to being I want to be curious, right? What did we say? Like maybe it's better to consider yourself like curious than intelligent or something like that. Like maybe I don't want to ever feel like I know it all. Maybe I should embrace this. Like I don't mind being in college with gray hair.
Or no hair or anything like that. Yeah, but yeah, like the older you get, your curiosity doesn't go away. It's like, you can learn how to do something like pick up the guitar at 50, with the understanding that the likelihood of you becoming a paid musician along the way is probably pretty darn slim. Not impossible, but slim, especially, on a much more big scale. But at least that opportunity is there, Think about, again, someone learning to play guitar at 50, learning how to code after retirement, taking cooking classes, learning sign language. Every one of those activities is asking the brain to build new pathways. And that's pretty incredible when you think about it. Maybe education isn't just something society gives children. Maybe education is one of the ways human beings continue becoming themselves. Now, something else that struck me while researching this episode: learning new things requires humility. The moment we decide, I already know enough, we've probably stopped growing. Do you think intellectual humility has become harder in a world where everybody feels pressure to already have an opinion?
Yes. And I think that goes back to it's hard to open yourself to learning, as we talked about, I think just in our last episode or maybe the one before, when changing your mind feels culturally punished. Right? And I say that because we even talked about that when we talk about politicians, because that's, I think, the biggest one that we hold, that you should apparently have forever known things and forever felt a certain way. And when we use in conversation to be like, you shouldn't like Joe Biden because he voted this way in the 60s. And I go back to, but he doesn't vote that way now, because shows that you can learn and you can evolve. And so what's sad is I think that's really a lot of it, because a lot of our culture seems to be around talking politics and stuff, and that's such a common example. It's almost passively shaming people for changing their minds, and it makes you almost need to like double down into that identity of having already known your truth or whatever that is, right? Like however to phrase that, because we see how we treat people on the big stages when they change their mind on something. And that trickles down to how we feel like we should treat each other in that same respect. That's how kind of that normalization can work. When you've got big examples, we're going to take those personally and say, oh man, yeah, he changed his mind on something. And we're saying that that's a bad thing. Therefore, I shouldn't change my mind on anything. Definitely doesn't feel like the right answer, but that's what I feel like has gone on with our country, as far as why people like can be presented something and you can feel like you're going crazy because to you this is facts and I'm presenting you facts, right? And that's why it can just be continually shut down. As I think there is a fear of changing our mind, especially on certain topics.
Yeah, and it's weird with politics too, because have there ever been politicians out there that flip flopped on the issue just because it was politically convenient to do so? Of course.
Right.
However, too many people want to completely dismiss the fact that someone did ultimately change their mind, by thinking it out and realizing, oh, side A was not correct. I'm going to vote for side B, and it's this mindset that people have that how could someone do that? If you're a politician, you should already know, when we already know that some politicians don't know much to begin with. um and yeah, we don't have much intellectual humility in this country at all. It is not encouraged, unfortunately. And I think sadly the results speak for themselves.
It
Now,
does. Yeah.
yeah,
It goes back to, I think that's why we kind of are the way we are today, with the really harsh mentalities against each other. So
yeah. Well, we're so good in this country, folks. USA.
we're so perfect.
Yeah. Well, now let's zoom out a little bit, because education isn't only personal, it's social. One of the strongest findings in civic research is that education tends to be associated with higher levels of civic participation. That doesn't mean every educated person votes or volunteers or stays informed, but education often gives people the tools to participate more confidently in their communities. When you hear the phrase "an educated society," what does that actually mean to you?
An educated society? Oh man. Access to education is easy. The education should actually be of good quality and it should not just be capped at elementary through high school, right? Like there is so much more that we could get out of our community education. Even for older people, like even looking at filling some of these gaps. Like, no, I actually don't think it should be a college's job to help teach kids the skills that they seem to be missing, right? Like this is coming up that they're teaching more or offering more like elective domestic skill things, but it's like, man, I don't want electives to be teaching the basics because unfortunately we built a society where a lot of parents are simply too busy to teach certain things, right? And so like even like financial management, stuff like that. Like I think it would be kind of nicer if those things could somehow be handled like at the community level because that goes back to that affects our community. And I would very much support allowing access for the person raised in a home where let's go back to the bootstraps episode again because that's my favorite because people with how they handle finances that's kind of handed down from your parents in a way like there's some stuff that's going to come from that and when you're in a household where you're constantly just trying to make sure the bills are paid you don't have the cognitive load to learn better skills to handle finances better, let alone to teach your child about finances. So I would like it if it wasn't contingent on going to college for people to learn those skills. Now, I think it's great that colleges are seeing this gap and understanding that there are 18 to 20-year-olds that like need some help with some things because we're not getting necessarily taught them the traditional way like in our homes anymore but we're still not providing that education to a decent bunch of people that aren't going to college. And that's not their fault. And I think it's something that would actually be good for the community as a whole and our cultural wellness if we encourage more people to, instead of feeling shame about it, have a place that they can go to learn these things. And I go back to, I'm fine with that. I'm actually fine with funding that personally. I would vote for that hands down every year, every election season. I would vote for community education that supports that stuff. I would even support, in a sense, driving schools because I go back to I've learned about people like myself that were just kind of dumped off in the world and be like, all right, good luck to you. You're 18, get out of my house. And I was like, but you didn't teach me how to do laundry. You didn't teach me like there were things that I got taught by my college roommates that is kind of embarrassing, because I was just set off with even less skills than I think most people were. So yeah, like I would love to see an expansion on that. I guess is what I'm saying. Like not just focusing on education for kids like kind of to the point of this is that we still can and I dare say need to learn some things after you're 18.
Yeah, and I think if more people did have that mindset, I think that would make them more civically responsible as well, and it would make them better voters. And I say that not in a partisan way. Like just less likely to vote for the hyperbolic candidates than not. But there are also plenty of other ways too that we can continue to learn, like think of public libraries, and those are kind of under attack these days, where you have like your Fox News is coming out and is talking about all the bad stuff that can happen at libraries. And to be clear, because libraries are open to the public, there are sometimes bad things that can occur in very specific libraries. I would be ignorant if I did not mention that. But think of the fact that you can go to a library, check out a book for free, and learn something new about like a new culture, about the political system in this country, about anything that you want, and just have it there for free. That is amazing. Like I think it was Frank Zappa who said, "If you wanted to learn, you go to the library. If you wanted to get laid, you go to college." You know.
Right. And I think like where this relates to civic engagement, right, is that education tends to expand the number of lives we get to experience without actually living them ourselves. And I think it gives you more ability to therefore look at your ballot, because this isn't intended to be a political thing, but unfortunately, our education access is really influenced by how we vote. So it would be kind of not fair to the topic, I think, to not bring it up at all. But you're more likely to see stuff that perhaps you can vote for that doesn't impact you directly, but more that second or third order effect, because you've basically created a sophistication for yourself by being more rubbing elbows with people of different walks of life, right? Because when you're in your school, like, yeah, like depending on your school, you might have the handful of poor kids and the handful of rich kids, but ultimately you're going to be interacting with a lot of people that are in the same socioeconomic stance as you, that are a lot of the same, like a little bit of religious exposure, education exposure. So it's a lot of it's going to be the same. College, I think, is one of those first opportunities to really get the melting pot experience of like really like meeting people from different walks of life and having more of a variety to you than you may be experienced in school.
Exactly. And, unfortunately, that is under attack by some people these days. But I digress. Now, one thing I appreciate is that education isn't supposed to tell us what to think. At its best, it's teaching us how to think, how to ask questions, how to evaluate evidence, how to recognize when we don't know enough yet. Education doesn't eliminate disagreement at all. It improves the quality of disagreement. Now, do you think that's something we've lost sight of? That education isn't about producing identical opinions, that it's about producing better thinkers?
I do. I think that is absolutely something we've lost track of, and that goes back to this thing here where we seem to just need to be right and somehow have always been right, and that I think is always going to stunt that in effect.
Agreed. And I think in terms of teaching us how to be better disagreeers, I think, the more we know, the more we are able to ultimately say to somebody, okay, I disagree with you, but I'm cool. Let's shake hands, and
Right. And also like even looking at, so those of us out in the workforce that have worked different places and maybe understand this, is like solutions don't always come when you have a bunch of like-minded thinkers in the same room. Better solutions tend to come when you have a variety of thinkers in the room. And that's where, education does require that too, right? Like it's not about, like you said, producing identical opinions. It's really meant to, I would say, true education teaches you to be curious and to always be learning and to ask questions, because science evolves. The things that we come to learn evolves, like it changes. It goes back to the silly thing that I had thought about, like our tongue and the different sections, because there were generations of us that were taught that the tip of your tongue tasted sour and some back bit handled bitter, and then like, but now we know that that's not true. And it is important to have the humility, otherwise you might start waging war against the people who said it's not true anymore because you're more embarrassed about having been taught something, which by the way isn't even your fault. You got taught something and you retained it. First of all, kudos. Like a lot of people don't retain shit from middle school science class. But like it's okay to embrace that we get better understandings of things, because it goes back to, this is why we don't use leeches anymore in healthcare. Like we learn and it gets better. And so I want to go back to, like, yeah, learning is better. Changing things is better. Now, there is some value to conservatism, that you don't just jump into every change like cannonball style. Like, it is okay to kind of put your toe in the water with some concepts, right? But it's like now it feels like there is almost a shame to even sticking the toe in the water by a lot of people. And that was never supposed to be the value of conservatism.
yeah, things change with time, unfortunately.
Yes. Like having a conservative mentality wasn't meant to never put your toe in the water, but now it kind of feels like that's what it feels like, I guess, is the relationship that I'm drawing there.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is just a fact that conservatism we grew up with is not the conservatism that we're seeing today. Because you know, they would have balked at a lot of things going on in Washington. But agreed there. I mean, like I said, I think the more educated you are, and I'm not necessarily talking about like college educated. You don't have to have a degree to do this, but the more educated you are, the more likely you are to be able to have better arguments in a sense of being able to say your point, allow the other person to say their point as well. I'm not talking screaming matches or anything like that. The
That's
tradition.
actually a designation that Mr. Reverend brings up a lot. Like he's talked about that quite a bit. Like in our family, is there is a difference between fighting and having an argument. Like, and I know we've kind of started to shift what that word means, where argument kind of like goes and it almost snaps, and it's like, oh, you're having a conflict argument. But having an argument on something, like my argument on this, is not the same as like I'm fighting with you having an argument, aka having a disagreement, I think is the actual better term when that is what is happening. But we've kind of started taking the term argument and treating it the same as disagreement. So I do think, fortunately, unfortunately, that term has started to evolve as it often does in our language. I know that frustrates a lot of people that it does that, but that's just the nature of language. When we start using a term for something else, it kind of changes what the term means. I mean, is a fun, playful one, look at queer. Queer did not always reference somebody being of the LGBTQ community. Queer used to mean just strange and out of place or something. And that one will always be ingrained in my memory because that was one of those words that I harassed my English teacher about, that I got sent to the office to a few times. And both times she sent me to the office, at least those two times, I grabbed her dictionary and went straight to the office with it. So that one's been ingrained as one of those that has had an evolution. But yeah, you can have an argument with somebody and it not necessarily be ugly or need to be defensive, even. It's just you're each sharing your argument on a topic.
Think of the word gay as well. There was a time in the early 1900s when you would have the average cishet white guy walking around saying, "I'm gay," not "I'm gay," but they're happy. Gay used to mean happy.
Right. What's the Christmas song that has gay in it?
I don't know.
See, I can't think of it on top of my head. It's not Christmas season. I'm just not there. But they're,
Having a gay old
look,
time.
yeah, like gay old time. I forget. It's like Merry and Gay or something like that. And it's like, hey, see, we didn't even change that one. We can keep that one. Just
No, anyway, now that idea that education teaches us how to think instead of what to think might be the perfect place to stop for a moment, because next I'd really like to talk about something that's becoming more important every year: critical thinking, media literacy, scientific literacy, and why those aren't just academic skills anymore. They're everyday survival skills. One thing I keep coming back to is this: schools teach us facts, education teaches us what to do with facts, and those are two very different things. Because information has never been more available than it is today. Most of us carry more information in our pockets than entire libraries held 100 years ago. So maybe the challenge isn't finding information anymore. Maybe it's figuring out what's actually worth believing. Now, let's talk about critical thinking for a moment, because when people hear the phrase critical thinking, think they sometimes assume it means being critical of everything, always doubting, always arguing, always looking for flaws. But that's not really what psychologists and educators mean. Critical thinking is really about slowing down long enough to ask better questions. Where does this information come from? Is there evidence? Could there be another explanation? Am I missing something? It isn't skepticism for the sake of skepticism. It's curiosity paired with evidence. Now, when someone says they do their own research, what do you think that should actually look like?
um, probably not what a lot of people practice in reality, right? Because I think a lot of people will get their one or two sources, or maybe it's at least a talking head or two, and they'll hear that person's opinion. and then accidentally do some bias searches, right? Because unfortunately, this even goes into kind of the simplicity thing. We like simple answers. If we trust this person, we want them to be right, right? And that's like even teaching my 11-year-old bonus dude, my bonus son, like there is a difference between searching to find an answer and searching like a bias search to see if you can find anybody that agrees with a answer, if that makes sense. Like there's a total difference. And this goes into some of our intellectual hygiene we talked about. Like you need to be more aware and more able to diversify your sources and more readily open to maybe check your source instead of just feeling good that it's validating something that you want to be true. Right. And that's something that isn't as comfortable. And our brains, like the fact of the matter is, we're not as geared for that. So that is something that you have to practice and flex within yourselves. One interesting thing that I did come up, and I'm pretty sure I didn't see this in your note. Anything about cognitive miser theory sound familiar to you?
We'll find out.
Okay, but our brains conserve mental effort. They're making deliberate thinking harder but valuable, if that makes sense. Like in this, I think the cognitive miser theory almost kind of ties into that simplicity bias. We just want to have known the answer. So we don't necessarily want to go into more, I think sometimes is what it is. But that's why it is a practice. It is an important practice if you want to be that type of human.
Agreed. Agreed. And, for me, when I hear, do their own research, I think the first thing that comes to mind are like anti-vaxxers and everything. And, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole there, but, I think in a broader sense, I think even the people that scoff at like the anti-vaxxers who quote unquote do their own research when it comes to like political stuff. I've talked about, how I've essentially done that before in the past by, going to the echo chamber of choice and reading things that already agreed with everything I, already thought. And that is not good. You want to be able to look at multiple credible sources. You want to distinguish opinion from evidence, especially. You want to be willing to change your mind, and you want to understand the limits of your own knowledge too. You personally don't know everything in the world. I don't know everything in the world. Nobody knows everything in the world. You could be wrong about something, even though you think in your heart of hearts you are right. And if you don't have the knowledge on how to be able to fully form your opinion, which means challenging yourself and not just finding ways to, hear you're right, you're right, you're right, then, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Right, because that's the temptation, right? Like that's almost like the thumbs up on your Facebook posts. Like it kind of ticks that same thing in our brain. We want people to say that we're right. It feels so good to be told that we're right. But when you're actually and factually wrong, what are you actually getting for yourself then?
Just a pat on the back for nothing.
Right. You're getting a pat on the back for believing something that's not true.
Yeah, unfortunately. Now, one thing I find fascinating, our brains love shortcuts. And, I think this is something we've talked about on numerous episodes in the past. Psychologists call them heuristics. Most of the time, they're incredibly useful. If every tiny decision required hours of analysis, though, we'd never get anything done. Think of the example I mentioned in previous weeks about Steve Jobs, with the outfits he wore, or you talked about Zuckerberg in your closet, which sounds rather dirty. But
Sounds dirty when you put it that way.
yeah, But shortcuts can also lead us to conclusions that feel right without actually being right. Critical thinking is one of the ways we slow those shortcuts down. Now, do you think people naturally confuse confidence with competence because those two don't always go together?
Yes. Yeah, and I even think that goes to that if you identify as being intelligent or if you identify as being like the like having all of the knowledge in something, and it almost like actively shuts you down to learning new things. And I think that's where that confidence can get dangerous. And that's going to more align with where you identify, right? Because if you identify as somebody who already knows everything, that's where your confidence is going to lie. But if you can shift that over and identify as somebody who actually wants to be fully knowledgeable, or somebody who actually wants to continue so that they can continue to master the craft, I think you can almost rehome that confidence, right? Because if you feel that in yourself, listeners, if anybody out there is like, yeah, I'm super confident in this, but oh, okay, I kind of see your point, and maybe I am not learning anymore. Because you can even like ask yourself, what do you do to keep learning in the thing you're most confident about? Do you do it? Because if your honest answer is no, you might be riding more on confidence than competence. But if you want to be more competent in something, maybe your confidence needs to be like more focused on that aspect, more focused on, I want to be the best at blank, not I am the best at. Right? One is always driving. One's driven. Oh, you can almost hear the growth mindset behind that. I want to be the best versus I am the best. And I think if you can shift that confidence to wanting to be versus feeling like you already are, that's going to put you in a much better place to not accidentally be that person.
Well, that reminds me of this reel I saw the other day. The reel was created by a doctor, but she was reacting to other videos that were out there, and she was reacting to this video of these two women. One of them was talking about how fruit can make you fat because there's like fructose in fruit. And just this woman was confidently spouting this nonsense stuff about how, fruit, the fats in fruit can, make you bulk up, and just how she was talking was super confident, but not right in any way, shape, or form. And this doctor was like almost like slack-jawed at like how stupid the words that were coming out of this woman's mouth were. But I noticed too how just utterly confident the woman in question was. And you can find that a lot too with people that are hardcore, into nutrition and everything like that. And there's nothing wrong with being hardcore. You want to be healthy, of course, but you want to be healthy in the right way and not, disregard something because there's a fancy word in the ingredients list, yeah.
Right. Actually, I think I keep meaning to check because I think somebody unfriended me over it. They they had shared, because I am one of those nerds a bit about like nutrition and how our food is handled. To be fair, for any of my Letterkenny friends out there, and she had shared something about baby carrots. If you didn't know this, it's actually just the chopped down bits of like ugly carrots that didn't make like the final cut, or maybe they just didn't grow to a certain size, etc. But basically that they're like treated, rolled in chlorine solution, the same chlorine that cleans your toilets. And I'm like, okay, friend, okay, let's talk about this. So this is the same chlorine. Like saying that it's the same chlorine as the toilets is like such it's a rage bait thing. Like that's what that's doing, right? It's trying to get emotions, and it's trying to get you on their side. But when you realize it's talking about concentrations here, right? And that context that got stripped from the meme that was really fun to share, the context got stripped because it's the same chlorine, sure, that's used to clean your toilet, but it's also the same chlorine that at right concentrations is used to clean our drinking water. It's used on pretty much any fresh cut fruit and salads and things like that. And so when you pitch it like that's this disgusting thing because we use this to clean toilets and we're drinking it. Well, we also use like, don't we use levels of formaldehyde for decaf coffee? Like, and that's like put in people that are dead. So, and I'd like kind of pointed out like, hey, like these things, and I put some knowledge out there, and I was like, I have a feeling I may have gotten unfriended because I can't think of the last time I saw anything from them on my feed since I said that. I was like, I risked that biscuit, but I'm okay with it.
Yeah, yeah. That it's. I mean, it's unfortunate losing a friend, I guess. But if it's something over that, maybe you
Yeah.
dodged a bullet.
But I do like that I've seen more doctors like having Facebook reels and doing even the TikToks for their, they're doing a split, or what's it called?
A
When
reaction, yeah.
not a reaction, there's like a term for it though. It's like it starts with their video and then it cuts over to their response or what, like response incoming. There's a term in TikTok and I'm not thinking of it right now because I need more coffee. But yeah, like I've really enjoyed seeing more doctors trying to use social media to help educate the misinformation out there. Dr. Tommy Martin is a really good one. He talks about, stuff like that. I've also enjoyed the doctors that are like, here's what I would tell you as a pediatrician if I wasn't afraid of hurting your feelings, like, and like dispelling some of the myths. So it's almost been a breath of fresh air to kind of see more of that out there too. That doctors are starting to understand that social media is starting to influence so much of what people believe because of the tactics being used in it to grab attention, that they're kind of starting to fight back. And I've really appreciated it. And even on a religious level, that's where I discovered Pastor Brandon, because he and a lot of a growing demographic are getting tired of biblical passages being used out of context for higher end manipulation, essentially. So I've really loved seeing that. I don't know if anybody else, maybe it's just because I'm a bit of a nerd and it just caught me in the algorithm to know that I would like that. But I highly recommend finding a few of those. They're really neat. There's a female doctor. I don't remember her name, but she's come up every now and then too. And she's like, here's why this is wrong. Here's the little bit of truth that it's based on, but here's what we actually know about it too.
Yes, and those videos will tend to show you that a lot of times there are no easy answers, compared
Right.
to what people want to give. Now, if critical thinking is about evaluating information, then media literacy is about evaluating where that information comes from. This one feels especially relevant today. Most of us don't wake up and read a newspaper from front to back anymore. We're getting headlines from social media, podcasts, hopefully us, YouTube, friends, family, group chats, and algorithms that have quietly learned what keeps us scrolling. That's a completely different information environment than even 20 years ago. So, media literacy isn't just knowing how to use technology, it's understanding how media works. Who created this? Why did they create it? What's missing? Is this reporting, opinion, satire, or advertising? Those are really valuable questions. Do you think we've reached a point where media literacy is just as important as reading literacy?
Oh, yes. Because I think really this is just the next evolution of literacy in a way. It's at least the next application to it, right? Because this is, whether we like it or not, this is where a lot of people are getting information now. And we need to kind of treat that with the respect that it deserves. Or we kind of, I honestly, I think not treating it with that respect is what's led to this. It's what led to like the misinformation battles. It's what's led to doctors like trying to claw it back now by trying to get involved in social media. And what stinks is I feel like it's a little late. I feel like it's because they went, well, it's just social media, so nobody should be taking it seriously. And what happened is the people who decided to take it seriously and run with the platform and get their messages out there did that with none of the educated people who know what they're talking about jumping in, because I think they didn't take it as seriously as they could have or should have. And so, yes, now it's going to be up to our level to have some self education. And even like that's where it's like I've kind of played with that on the Facebook page now, is going and giving the nerdy verdict on something of, is this actually informative or is it just trying to like manipulate an opinion? And let's do a fact check on it too. Like, is this even true? Because there's a lot of misinformation and they don't directly lie. But boy, howdy, it's like the chlorine on the baby carrots. There's a lot of context being removed to convince you that this is just as easy as voting this way. Because, yes, simplicity bias. It's like, I feel like that like really drives a lot of what we do, is like, oh, yes, that's the answer and I am done. And that's the thing that I think we need to fight.
Yeah, I mean, I think you would have a lot of people, like especially in Portland here, that would love to crow about how certain conservative folks, let's put it out there, don't have proper media literacy and everything like that. But I would also challenge that a lot of those progressive types themselves are stuck down the MS Now rabbit hole, or their news source of choice rabbit hole, and don't have. I mean, it's like they have the knowledge; they're just not going out and trying to test that knowledge of whether what they're actually thinking is correct or not. A lot of times, people do want to call out the other side for not having proper media literacy when they don't have it themselves, which is unfortunate.
Well, and that comes down to you're negging somebody for a lack of education. Now, that's going to go into a privilege top conversation then, right? Because saying shame on you for not being educated feels like kind of strange when it's like, okay, so you mean stuff that they didn't have a control over, right? And so a lot of it is we need to get out there the awareness of the importance of media literacy. And I do feel like there are people trying to do that. However, I think like not making certain social media sources, um, more accountable for those things is kind of not necessarily the best thing. Unfortunately, I think we put too much in the, well, it's your responsibility to learn that lane. And I think that's what's causing kind of some cultural damage.
Yeah. Now, think about how often you've seen a headline online. You felt an emotional reaction and then discovered later that the headline left out important context. We've probably all experienced that. It doesn't necessarily mean someone was trying to deceive us. Sometimes headlines are written to grab attention. Sometimes nuance just doesn't fit into 50 characters. But that's exactly why slowing down matters. The first thing we hear isn't always the whole story. Now, have you ever changed your mind about a story after learning more information?
Man, yeah, probably several times. I don't think I could pick just one to be fair. I don't even know if I can really identify the first one, other than, like, I just remember kind of really questioning a lot of stuff that I was taught, about our Hispanic neighbors in Texas, like, especially when I moved out of Texas and, got a little bit more of that sophistication and meeting more people. But yeah, so I don't have a specific one other than kind of an ongoing engagement with it.
Yep. Now, one thing I think education can give us is the confidence to say, I don't know enough yet. That's a surprisingly powerful sentence if you think about it, because once we admit we don't know, we become teachable again. Media literacy helps us evaluate information. Scientific literacy helps us understand how knowledge itself grows. Now, science gets misunderstood sometimes. People occasionally think science is supposed to provide certainty, but that's not really how science works at all. Science is a process. It's constantly testing ideas, gathering evidence, revising conclusions when better evidence appears. In a way, science is built around the idea that learning never ends. Now, do you think people sometimes mistake changing scientific recommendations for weakness when it's actually one of science's strengths?
Unfortunately, yes, even though I don't think they're supposed to, right? Like, can I say when convenient? Because
Yeah.
let me tell you, people really love the advancements in like pacemakers and external wearables and the ability to control your insulin. Not I was going to be silly and control your insulin from your phone, but that's not really how that works. But like, I'd hate to give that false idea that that exists. But I think it is very selective, right? Because when we have a vested interest in a scientific or even healthcare advancement, right? And which, a lot of that comes from science, right? We're more likely to want it, right? Because it's going to solve our problem. It's the new thing, it's going to solve our problem. But when it's a new concept and it challenges something that we feel like we've always known, I think that's when you feel that cognitive dissonance, when you feel that heel dig feeling. I think that's where it's viewed as a weakness. That's where, well, that same doctor used to say eggs were great. And now that same doctor is saying that they're wrong. But I really like my morning scrambles. So fudge that doctor. That doctor has changed his mind. That doctor is now crap, right? Because unfortunately, if you're not checking that in yourself, That's how easy a cognitive bias can take over your opinion on something or your ability to learn something new, right? If you like identify more with loving eggs than understanding whether or not eggs are ultimately good for you, you're going to lean towards things that are going to support wanting to eat eggs. Just to kind of take a silly example, take it away from politics, because I think there's even comedians who have joked about whether or not eggs are good for you 1 year or not, right? So I think we can kind of look at that one as an example, as it were, of like, if you are finding that you are selective or that you flip the appreciation of a scientific neurological healthcare provider's mind just because they updated a stance on something that you, when you think about it, just didn't want to update your belief on, that's something that maybe could be a clue to identify that in yourself, right? So that you can be a little bit more charged towards wanting science to continue to improve our lives, and then you can actually apply more of that to you instead of disregarding and throwing out stuff because it's like, no, I don't want that.
Yeah, and I think too, like the more education that you do have, the more you understand how the scientific method actually works. So when science does ultimately change their mind about a particular something, and it definitely happens, you are able to at that point say, okay, they must have had some new information, not they're lying to us, which seems to be the
Right.
default for some people these days.
Right, because unfortunately that's one of those things, right? Is that feeling attacked. Whether you're actually being attacked, it doesn't like take away the feeling of being attacked, and therefore it's like, yep, they are just lying. They are lying to me.
Yeah, now that reminds me of something we actually talked about during Freedom Month. Changing your mind isn't always a sign that you were wrong. Sometimes it's a sign that you just kept learning. Psychologically, that can be difficult because once we publicly commit to an opinion, our brains become motivated to defend it. Admitting we've learned something new can feel like losing, but maybe education asks us to redefine what winning looks like. Maybe winning isn't always being right. Maybe winning is becoming a little more accurate than we were yesterday. Growth usually begins where certainty ends. Now, when was the last time you remember changing your mind about something important and looking back, were you glad you did?
Everything. I don't know. It goes back to I used to be kind of a tidge racist. I didn't realize that growing up, so I'll go with that one. Yeah, because I think that's something that people have a hard time admitting, is when they used to believe something really fucking backwards. And I used to have beliefs. I used to have beliefs on the homosexual community, which was funny because I was a queer kid myself, but you always just push those thoughts away. Like, no, 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 I just like her as a friend, and that just makes me tingly in places for some reason that we'll just ignore that because that's bad. Um, so I think learning a lot of what I did and really psychology classes is what broke that down for me. But I used to believe that being homosexual should stay in the DSM as a diagnostic thing. Yep, Tim is cringing. That is cringe for me to say it out loud. But you know what? We need to stop fearing admitting where we've grown, because I think that's a lot of what is wrong, right? That's a lot of like what that's why it's like, why does this person still believe this? And it's because we make it so hard to say I used to believe something and now I do not. It is so much easier for me to say I used to believe parts of the tongue tasted different things than it is to say I used to have some anti LGBTQ beliefs than it is to say I used to hold some racist beliefs and concepts about the neighbors. Because being from Texas, it was just so much easier to like, oh, bad, because look at all the bad influence they have, right? Um, so I would say, like, yeah, I've changed my mind about a lot of important things. Super, super extra proud, even that I changed my mind about those two things specifically. And I think that's what even caused an even greater chain effect for me. Um, for being open to changing my mind about more stuff.
I think that's something that honestly should be celebrated because people should it's like, I think you would agree with this. Like, yeah, thinking that stuff was not right. You weren't looking necessarily to hurt people. It's how you were raised, and everything. But the fact that, you were able to not get defensive when that type of stuff was pointed out to you, but you took that as a learning opportunity, and you took that as an opportunity to say, yeah, okay, I was wrong. I need to change my mindset on this.
Right. And we're supposed to. Like that's the whole thing is like I saw an article recently where some dude was like complaining about Trump derangement syndrome like ruining dating. And I I had to be a smartass on it probably. I don't remember what I said. I said something. I was like, "Oh, you mean like women don't like it when you have on your profile something that indicates you're a racist or something?" Because he's like, "I'm MAGA light," was the whole thing. And because he was MAGA light, he couldn't date because so many profiles said da 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 da. And I had said something to the tune of like, "Well, social rejection of a belief is actually supposed to teach you that that's not a good belief in the culture." And this goes back to the online echo chamber. Like, we're not sitting and having those awkward conversations where you accidentally say a thing and the group informs you are wrong. We're doing it online where you're more likely to get at least a few people that sees your stupid, shitty comment and goes, "Yeah, America," instead of challenging you. And therefore, you're viewing that as I'm right, I'm right. And therefore, people that are commenting, granted, we're not great at being calm with each other anymore, but even the people who are trying, like, I get so much venom in teeth. And I try very hard not to be an a hole about it because I know that's not how you talk to people and actually like bring them through to like see that there's like opportunities that they can educate, pivot their mentalities if they wanted to. But yeah, like sorry, that was like just one of the funnier ones recently is we've lost that because there's so much more, online social engagement unless you're around a group of people sitting social engagement where you had like that impact there more ready to happen to you. And it's also like harder in person to have to stomach some of those comments and some of that feedback on you because you are sitting there and you're not having like the privacy of it being like an online exchange. It is happening real time and in front of other people. And so you need to like they're watching how you are absorbing the information too and how you are reacting to it. And that is going to make or break whether or not you get kicked out of that little tribe that you were just in.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of the times when I was studying with the Jehovah's Witnesses, and they would try to tell you that anytime you would get like negative feedback from somebody, it was the devil doing that, pushing, making it, trying to challenge you and everything, and but there was something kind of nefarious about that too, because they were essentially training the people in that religion, and they're not the only ones that do this, but they were training them to disregard other people potentially coming back with points that may make them think, and yeah, there are negative people out there, there are jerks out there and all that stuff, and
Yeah.
I'm not celebrating the jerks, but it seems like that too often, whether it be in a religious context, a political context, a medical context these days, as we've talked about, there are too many people that just want to be with groups that want to continue to cheer them on for believing in a certain way. And anytime anybody wants to challenge you on that, oh no, how dare you? That's wrong. That's wrong. And, you know,
Yeah.
yeah, wrong.
And it doesn't feel good to be told you're wrong. That's fair. Like, and we do have kind of the pleasure trap in our brain that it feels really good to be agreed with. But unfortunately, just because it feels good does not mean it is the best thing for you. Just because chocolate cake is delicious doesn't mean you should have it for every meal.
Agreed. Agreed. Now, here's something I don't think that gets talked about enough. Education isn't just about jobs or test scores or graduation rates. It's about culture. Think about everything education introduces us to: history, music, art, literature, science, philosophy, languages, different ways of seeing the world. Every one of those experiences expands our understanding of other people. Now, when you hear the phrase cultural wellness, which I think you've mentioned on the show many times before, what comes to mind for you?
Yes, because I feel like I'm not sure that this is actually a term that exists or something we've just kind of started bringing up over time. But cultural wellness to me, like, isn't just physical wellness because mental health is physical health too, right? And yeah, like having education is very much part of our mental wellness landscape too, because it does directly kind of like it kind of translates over to it, right? Like being educated, I would say, is more likely to make you have even better emotional IQ than say somebody who's never exposed to education. And the reason I say that is because if you're going into a learning mentality, if you identify as a student and you are learning, you're keeping that neuroplasticity alive too, which means you can also learn other things as long as you're open to it. For example, you can learn more about how your mind works. You can do some of that shadow integration theory stuff from Jungian psychology and be more open to I'm not always right about something. Correct, like, if that kind of makes sense for a jump there of, like, basically, I think if you have a continual learning mentality, that can go so much further than learning hobbies or learning facts or, another History Channel document. I think that can easily translate that neuroplasticity over to mental health engagement for yourself, and that's why I think, like, identifying as somebody who wants to learn and somebody who wants to know is so much more important than identifying as somebody who is smart, somebody who is intelligent, or somebody who knows something.
Yes, and I think the ability to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes is important, and that's something you can learn, through educating yourself. It could be something as simple as music. Now, think of the song "Fuck the Police" from NWA. On the surface, classic rap song, not necessarily one you want to play in front of the baby reverend, just because of some of the word choices that are occurring in that song. But on a broader scale, especially for, white guys like me, it can put you in the shoes of what it was like, or what it continues to be like for African Americans in the United States when it comes to dealing with the police out there. Now, the song in question, the singers are hyperbolic. They're kind of channeling a spirit that they would love to challenge in real life. I guess, if that makes sense, but don't follow through on because they know it would just lead to them getting shot or something like that. But you can understand what it's like for a human being to have to deal with stuff like that. You put yourself in their shoes. And I think that was a beautiful thing that, NWA did for a song called Fuck the Police. It's not that because again, for me personally, it's not that I think all police are bad. I do not think that. I think there is a lot to critique about them, and I think being that they are holding some, positions of power in our society, I think we should constantly, keep them in check and make sure people that are abusing the system are, being held responsible for their particular actions. But I think, because of me going out of my way to seek out a particular song like Fuck the Police allowed me to see things in a different way, and I think that is a beautiful.
Yeah, and then going back to, reading or exploring stuff written from people from different walks of life, there's actually a fun body of research on reading from authors from different backgrounds. And it points specifically, basically, people who read a lot of literary fiction tend to score higher on tests of perspective taking, actually predicting what somebody else is thinking or feeling. And the theory is that fiction gives your brain practice sitting inside someone else's head with lower stakes than real life. And that practice transfers to real life. So it's basically a rehearsal space for empathy. So cultural wellness isn't just nice to have, it's a case, it's functionally training a skill, right? So basically, like when you read books, and I would dare you, if there is a person or demographic or however that you feel those cognitive dissonance feelings towards. Let's go police, because that is one that, yes, I do unfortunately think we think police are bad. Under the slight asterisk, unless they're helping you directly in a moment, because that is something that, again, I feel like I notice with people. But if there's a book out there written by a police officer, just kind of talking about their life and how they became who they are, I would suggest reading it. I really would. If you've got a certain feeling against veterans for some reason, because there are some people who kind of aren't a fan of veterans. I've come across this as yeah, it's kind of a thing where it's like they assume because you're a veteran, you always vote Republican and you must love Donald Trump. And da, 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 da. Like there is a lot of weird stereotypes held on veterans. And I have learned that sometimes when people find out that I am married to a veteran, that they suddenly have all sorts of questions about me. And so like, yeah, like I would totally seek out books, even if it's not autobiographical, if it's I mean, I would almost want it to be autobiographical. So at least you're reading a real story, not a fictitious story about somebody who is that way. But, so that you can kind of groom a little bit more and understanding that there are no demographic that is all of them are bad. I mean, save for maybe like Nazis and stuff like that, but like, there's very rare exceptions to that one. But for the most part, it is one bad apple. It is not a bushel of bad apples. And now that can be contagious, right? Because if you don't get the bad apple out, unfortunately, it can normalize it enough for the nearby apples and then it can spread. That's that whole analogy that I don't think people finish all the time. Like you should still try to get out the bad apple, but
Well, and I, we can on a later date go further in the weeds on this, but I, do recall you pointing out, that, if you think about it, Nixon was the one who ended the draft, which made the military essentially another career choice for civil service in the United States. And because of that, people want their jobs, right? And when you have a particular political party that goes out of their way to slash large amounts of that job away and keeps people from, rising up the ranks, rising up the ranks is the same in the military technically as it would be in a private business, going, getting a promotion or something like that. And so, yeah, if you have a career out there that is being affected by a certain political party out there, I can understand why people would be a little cautious continuing to want to vote for that party, even if their mindset might align. Yes.
I mean, I have nothing. Sorry, I just don't have anything. Like, yep, like you nail on head.
Yes. All right. Now, one of my favorite things about learning is realizing how much I still don't know. And that might sound discouraging, but I actually find it pretty exciting because it means there's always another book to read, another conversation to have, and another perspective to understand. When we stop learning, our world can slowly become smaller, not physically, mentally, emotionally, culturally. Learning keeps expanding that world. Now, do you think curiosity might actually be one of the healthiest personality traits a person can develop?
Yeah, I really do. And I think that's even come up of like always be curious, right? Maybe don't be convinced that you know something. Identify as somebody who's curious about something. Identify as somebody who wants to know about something, right? Curiosity is a good trait. And it goes back to, yeah, there's an old adage that discouraged that too, right? Curiosity killed the cat. I think everybody's heard that, not just us from the South and the Bible Belt. But I think, unfortunately, yeah, curiosity's gotten a bad rap, but it never should have because we've always been curious animals. And I think that curiosity trying to be like essentially domesticated out of us so that we're not curious but just receptive to being told, it kind of just lines us up to being manipulated. And I think, unfortunately, that is what has happened with certain demographics. And unfortunately, when you look at certain color coded maps, and if you align them to also the education rates in those areas, there is sometimes a kind of depressing correlation.
Agreed. Agreed. There is a great documentary out there that I've talked about before called Hillbilly, which is kind of a deep dive in. It's a great documentary. It's a deep dive into Appalachia, the Appalachia country, and all that, and how great the Republican Party is in terms of talking to those people, not necessarily following up on the talk that they want to give, but they talk to them much better than what Democrats have been able to do over time.
Why, my favorite part of that was the shoes, the sending of the shoes, and they're just like, what the fuck is wrong with you? We have shoes. This is just how we are. Like, and like, can you imagine like how kind of borderline insulting that had to be, like just to be sent shoes because like people thought like they saw some pictures on a news thing or something and just made this assumption about your entire culture and went, oh well, these must need this, and it's like no, like it's like we had shoes, silly. We just, why wear them if you're just on your porch? Why wear them if you're just in your front yard? Like, and it's really kind of funny because contact with the earth actually seems like it's kind of good for us in a way, but that's kind of beside the point. But yeah, all it was not understanding the local culture. And when we filter everything through our own understanding, and this goes back to because you're not sophisticated if you're not out there kind of understanding and learning. Therefore, you put everything through just the filter of your culture that you were raised in. So, yes, a lot of people in America, if you saw kids constantly without shoes, you would actually think that they are impoverished enough that giving them shoes is like the nicest thing you can do to them.
And then they would get them dirty, and then they would break apart, and then they would be barefoot again and getting rickets. I don't know.
If like it was just, I don't know. I saw Hillbilly as well, and I thought that one was a really good one. And yeah, like there's even a little bit of the, I don't know if I want to call it not racism, but I guess it could be like lower end bigotry that we still kind of hold like some of these not so great ideas about ba 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 ba. Like we still use the dueling banjos to kind of like make fun of certain things.
Yeah, yeah, and it allows a lot of people in other parts of the country to completely dismiss a geographical area to where most of the African American community lives in this country, sadly. But different topic for a different day. But anyway, when we started today's conversation, we asked a simple question: why should someone without children care about education? I think we've discovered that education was never about children. Education shapes workers, neighbors, voters, parents, leaders, artists, scientists, volunteers, communities, and maybe most importantly, it shapes the way we think. Not by giving us every answer, but by teaching us how to ask better questions. That's something every one of us benefits from, whether we ever set foot in a classroom again or not. Now, if someone listening today remembers only one thing from our conversation today, what do you hope it is?
Oh, it's the I don't know enough yet. Is one of the healthiest sentences a person can say out loud. Everything we talked about today, the lifelong learning, the neuroplasticity, the critical thinking, the humility about being wrong, all of it comes back to that one move, staying willing to be a beginner again. And that's valuable to literally everybody listening, whether or not you've got a kid in school, a diploma on the wall, any of it. You just have to keep showing up curious. Don't keep showing up thinking that you're the master of everything. You're going to be blind to new things that ultimately could possibly improve your quality of life. But if you keep being curious, you keep that open mindset, that always learning mentality, oh, I think that would be my biggest takeaway for like anybody ever. And it's funny because it seems like that is a theme almost at the end of every episode is whatever topic we're talking about, stay curious about it. Don't end with what we told you today. Don't take us as gospel or anything like that. Take the conversation as inspiration to go out and learn. Vet some sources. If you find something that contradicts us, by all means, we love reading it. Now, you might be disappointed if we don't like your source, but we will probably read it.
Probably, probably. Now, for me, I think my biggest takeaway is this: a healthy education system doesn't simply produce educated individuals, it shapes healthier communities, and maybe that's why education belongs to all of us. Not because we're all students, but because we are all neighbors.
Yes.
something I think to keep in mind, importantly. It's like we could have gone a little further down the political rabbit hole with this, and I'm kind of glad we did not. But it's like the more educated the average person on the street is, the better it is for society overall. Even if we are just thinking economically, think about the person who constantly educates themselves, or the person who has access to education, that is in a particular industry that may be being affected by something. Let's take a coal miner. If we had more options for education out there, with the coal mining industry becoming as dwindled as it is. um, Close up, close up.
I'm sorry, I cannot stand it when my camera blurs. I'm sorry. You can ignore me when I'm doing stuff like that.
Yeah. But, if someone in a dying industry like the coal industry had more access to education, it would be much easier for them to be able to get out of that. Or just think of somebody who is in a particular set of employment that doesn't want to be there anymore. With
Right.
access to education that doesn't, break the bank or anything like that, it's going to allow them to freely move on. And I think, the more you think about it, I think that's the more that some people want. That's some of the reason why some people want to kind of keep us from having that. And again, I'm not throwing blame at one party or the other here, politically, but it does seem like there is plenty of reasons for the very, very rich to want the average person on the street to be a, time card punching person, and not the articulate, educated person that, we have the ability to be.
Right. Because, oh my goodness, if people were actually a little bit more educated, they'd be more civically involved. And that might actually mean that they're researching and forming their own opinions about things. And therefore, their vote is being more influenced by that, by their own ability to have some critical thinking, of being willing and able to fact check and even challenge, ideals that are given to them. And I think that's really why, tinfoil hat on and all, that I feel like a certain side tends to really neg on public education and tends to really have this talking point of, well, they don't use it right. Look, and they use it for this, and therefore you shouldn't give them money. Meanwhile, taking money away from education isn't going to solve the education problem, right? I don't understand why that's the narrative. It should be looking at it and using it differently then, because I think it is absolutely criminal that teachers have to get parents to help supply school supplies so that kids can be comfortable through a day. I think that is so sad. And I mean, yeah, I get it. You can make some arguments about tissue and stuff, but my goodness, if we can supply every government fudging building and every military base with basic toilet paper and tissue, I do not understand how we cannot do that for our public education system. My brain can't wrap around it.
Yeah, agreed on that. Agreed on that. But I think that will bring us to a wrap this week. Now, before we wrap things up, there were a couple of movie trailers that I think the baby reverend would be interested in. The last trailer for the brand new Spider-Man film has dropped, and the first official trailer for Avengers Doomsday has dropped as
Ooh.
well.
Is
Yes.
that Avengers going to have a Spider-Man in it? Because I know he's joined some of that, right?
Yeah, it's going to have, I believe, all of the Spider-Man in it. Just like the what was it? No Way Home, the third one that brought in Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield from the other multiverses.
I'm
They're
sorry,
all
Andrew
going to be.
Garfield is one of my favorite actors. I got goosebumps. I haven't seen the trailers because, as you guys know, I don't always keep up with what's that kind of stuff. So I didn't know. Is Andrew Garfield going to be back?
I believe so. Yes, but also too. Did you know Andrew Garfield was in an episode of Doctor Who?
I did not. I stopped watching Doctor Who after Clara. I couldn't get over Clara. Every now and
Uh,
then, actually, no. It was I did watch a little bit. Oh, the one that really broke my heart though was the one that was more like the sisterly relationship. I can't remember the actress's name. But there's a few times I had to stop watching Doctor Who. I didn't really give a shit whether or not they made a female doctor or not. My thing was I can't take any more heartbreaking stories from this world.
yeah,
Donna. It was Donna. Donna was the one that broke my heart, and I went back and I was like, nope, I'm done. I think I need to be done.
Well, speaking of Donna, though, they did bring her back for the Disney Plus version of the show and gave her a very happy ending.
Oh, good. That's nice because in a way it was sad happy in the original one. I try not to do spoilers because I know there's people that'll pick up on a show and like really want to get into it, but
But for
it's good. Like the Donna storyline was just kind of super heartbreaking for me.
yeah, but we are talking about something that's like 20 years old now at this point. But as far as Andrew Garfield, though, it's in season 3. It's the Dialects in Manhattan episode. It's a
Really? Okay.
two-parter. Yeah, he was one of the people in the Hoover Towns, when the Doctor and Martha went to New York City and had to fight the dialects. But as far as the Marvel movies, the Spider-Man, I'm probably going to see that by default. I mean, I've been a huge fan of the Spider-Man movies since the first Tobey Maguire one, and I actually remember the old '70s TV show on CBS that looks hokey as hell today. The Doomsday trailer didn't really do it for me, folks. Like I've talked about it before. I think Avengers Endgame for me was the perfect endpoint for the Marvel universe, and I gave some of the stuff after that a shot. But I think the fact that it was so much content being thrown, our way as fans, like multiple Disney Plus series, multiple movies, and the movies had silly things like Black Widow blowing up this sky fortress, falling from the sky and then landing on the ground without a scratch. Without a parachute or anything like that, because that's just what you do, right?
Yeah, I guess we're
And
just
yeah,
gonna change what their powers are because I didn't remember Black Widow having any form of like invincibility.
I don't get it, but because I've been trying to watch some of the ones I've missed, like the Fantastic Four movie on Disney Plus. I couldn't sit through it all the way through. I've been watching it in pieces, and some of it is pretty good, but I just think those movies have passed me by. Is what it is. That's the whole part about growing and all that stuff, but the Spider-Man one seems pretty interesting. I think we might get a little Venom in there. That might be cool. But other than that, Doomsday, not so much.
Bum skis. I hate to hear that. We actually knew about the Spider-Man movie coming out because, yes, with the baby Reverend seeming to be a fan of Spider-Man, he literally has Spider-Man themed bath toys and all of the Spider-Man stuff, and costumes are already starting to roll out at Costco for some reason. And they Girl Spider, Spin, he calls her Girl Spider, but Ghost Spider, Spin, and Spider-Man all in a row, and I'm like, oh, don't see it, don't see it, don't see it. But I
Look
don't know.
over there.
I might be getting a costume closet going. But we're actually talking about because it is out now as we're speaking today, I believe. Spider-Man.
Within the next week or two, yeah.
Okay, so I just know that there's a deal because we were thinking about, having a splurge night and having a pizza night because we have T-Mobile and there's like certain deals that you get on there and it was like Happy Webberoni pizza or whatever. So you can get like a $5 pizza or something from Little Caesars, I guess. So we might hit the easy button because with a recording day and me having my other job, I know today is going to be busy and I've got my bonus son and my baby Reverend here today. So I'm going to have to maximize the most I can here on the next few hours.
Well, there you go. That's why Little Caesars is made, even though that place is,
Oh, stop. I don't know. I'm a sucker for two types of foods. I like the cheapest version and the most expensive versions, and that is cheeseburgers and pizza. I don't know what it is about Little Caesars back when they used to just be like a $5 pizza, because now I think they're more because we were talking, I was like, oh, it's $5. Isn't it always supposed to be $5? Like, not in decades, Mr. Reverend. I'm pretty sure up to $7 at one point, and that was before they went extinct in my area.
I will say this: the guy who created it is named Mike Ilitch, or was named. I think he's passed away, but he did one really good thing in life, and I'll say this before we wrap up. But he found out that Rosa Parks, who was living in Detroit in the end parts of her life, was about to become evicted. So he made sure that that was something she never had to worry about again. He didn't advertise it. He didn't say, look what I'm doing and, give me an award or anything like that. But he made sure Rosa Parks was able to live in her home for the rest of her days, not having to worry about, being evicted or anything like that. And, for that, I commend him. Sometimes people in big business can do the right thing at times.
And normally it's when they're not bragging about it.
Yeah, it's nice when they don't brag about it instead of, look what I did. But on that note, anything you want to say to our friends at home before we wrap things up?
You do the charitables for the charitable's sake. Sorry, it's another Letterkenny line. Thought I'd throw that out there. But no, I mean, I think we pretty much wrapped it up. Stay curious, everybody.
All right. Well, Education Month, back to school month or Education Month, whatever we're calling this, will continue next week. So each week we have something in this podcast space to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
Ciao.
Fancy word. Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy
on YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Bye, friends.